This is another one of those videos where it's something that just interests me personally, and you guys might be able to tag along for the ride, but who's to say? Artificial intelligence is something that sci-fi writers are extremely interested in, and always have been. From the very first ideas of the genre, Frankenstein's creature, for example, but also Samuel Butler's 1872 novel Erewhon and its Book of Machines. The idea that machines could be dangerous without control, an idea that would become more and more prevalent as the decades would wear on, was fairly revelatory for the time, since Victorian society was increasingly enamored with machines in general and having them do basically all the work that they could. But as we go on to the early 1900s, we go to Rossum's Universal Robots, a Czech play that featured one of the first AI rebellions, though the robots in this particular work are more biological in nature. Still, they are intelligent, they are artificially created. The point stands. Conversely, considering this was Jack Williamson's 1947 story With Folded Hands, in which the AI rebellion puts them as guardians of humanity who make humans perfectly safe by stripping away our ability to do anything more than sitting with folded hands. So fast forward over half a century to 2002 and we have Aura, an artificial intelligence created by an obsessive man who is put in a game called The World. Yes, this is .hack I'm talking about. This particular AI was created to try and awaken by analyzing the player's feelings as they were playing the game, with the idea that this AI would then wake up properly socialized, or at least be able to understand human interaction better. Okay, that makes sense. That tracks, right? The bad guys want Aura to feel nothing but bad feelings to stall out her growth, so we have a through line of just what AI would come to mean in online game-style anime. But here there's a clear chain of conscious thought put into this particular idea. This is probably the best example of AI and its possible creation in an anime, because there's a clear logical chain behind it. There's an intentionality here that explains why an AI would end up in this situation, and that there was human intent behind the AI's creation at all. And then came Sword Art Online. Yui started off as a different program that was designed to interact with humans, so it made sense that she could conceivably mimic human interactions like an AI might, though calling her a full AI feels a little bit disingenuous. But then she was attracted by positive feelings that Kirito and Asuna were putting off, and I got a little off-put. Okay, fine, it's a little soft sci-fi, but it could be tracked as a progression at least, and let's be reasonable, of all the sins that Sword Art Online made, this is probably the least egregious one. And then we come to Gundam Build Divers. Sarah, the AI, comes pretty much out of nowhere. She's created from the feelings of the Gunpla that have been scanned in as leftover data, and with it comes a dangerous precedent. There's no reason for her to spring up out of nowhere, she just exists to be a plot point, and it's fairly transparent. When the AI in Westworld rolls snake eyes and go nuts, it's either a malfunction in the original movie or intentionally added. Halo AIs go haywire because of limitations in their programming and their purposes. When AI in anime appear at this point, it seems like they could be leaning towards being entirely predicated on something ephemeral like feelings, or worse yet, just 'cause. That's a major issue because sci-fi in general should exist in a state of plausible improbability as opposed to complete impossibility. Dr. Gary Wolfe, professor emeritus at Roosevelt University, stated in his great courses that science fiction is different from fantasy and nonfiction because it shows a world that could be rather than a world that cannot be or a world that is. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but when your story does not require at least a reasonable explanation for a fantastical element, then it stops being sci-fi and starts being complete fantasy. Relative quality about Gundam Build Divers not coming into this situation. Let me carry on. If you're going to make a genre piece, then you should probably just make a genre piece. There's no shame in it either way. Fantasy, sci-fi, romance, mystery, horror, whatever. But when you treat certain elements of sci-fi without the proper respect for what's gone before, then you're going to run afoul of what I like to call the strain problem. In Soko no Strain, which is a mech show, of course, the problem is that the main characters are going off to fight in a war that's taking place light years away, and they're never going to see each other again, or even if they do, one will be a lot younger than the other, and the other will be like a million years old or whatever. The point is, that they're being separated and one goes to chase after the other. Okay, cool. Nothing new there. But in much the same way as you can't make a pie without first inventing baking, you can't have an interstellar war without faster than light travel. Even if you solve the fuel problem, you will still arrive at the offending star system decades, if not centuries, after the war is over. You fight over an offense you did not give against those who were not alive to be offended. Lousy way to do business, but that's just my take on it. But in the same way, if you have AI that appears for no discernible reason, then you're doing both your story and your audience a disservice. The things featured in the story should exist for a reason, even if it's a little on the shallow side. But an AI is an entity that needs a little bit of preamble for it. It could have been as simple as we're trying to understand how players react to this sort of stimuli, or this was a rogue programmer like in .hack, but when it's just, boom, an AI with no worthwhile substance as to why this thing got created or what it appeared from, then you're asking your audience to stop thinking about your story. It's an admission of substantive emptiness. Focusing on the feelings, not the storytelling, is essentially a failure on the part of the narrative because an emotional reaction is not automatically the sign of a good story. Now, usually when that does happen, it comes along with a good story, but it doesn't have it intrinsically in there. I guess what I'm getting at is if you're going to write sci-fi, don't let your story fall apart because of easily fixed problems. AI is a big enough story in itself that if you're going to introduce them as a focal point to your story, they need to be taking center stage as a fully realized idea. You may feel like you're treating your audience like idiots when you explain a bunch of things to them, but you're actually just showing your work and kind of showing off your nerd cred at the same time. Write like your audience is stupid, because they're smart enough to understand it. Sci-fi has a lot of contradictions, don't you think? Michael Crichton always said that the part he enjoyed about writing his sci-fi novels was the research, and the part that he didn't like so much was the writing. As writers and consumers of media, we should probably hold more people to doing the research. Of course, I could just be another nerd, but yeah, sure, let me know in the comments, huh?
That being said, this is Professor Otaku, the greatest American anime critic, signing off.
Of substantive emptiness.
Exactly.
Fuck you. Christ, you scared the piss out of me.
Sorry.
I'm gonna fucking kick in your door one of these goddamn days. Piece of shit.